Well, that mic working? Cool. All right, hey. Thanks, Jürgen. I do want to reiterate a couple of facts Jordan stated before we start. Keeping the wife happy, important. Going to get to a bug later. I originally had a slow work now, and I do everything from back-end real-time data systems right through to helping the Unity team. Sorry? I also get to do some electronics. So recently for work, I had this guy done. So that's a circuit board design, fabricated in China, like $30 for 5 of them, delivered in 4 days. It's amazing. There is 374 traces on that board and 24 vias. It's a 2-layer board. It's my rapid prototyping board, so it takes my favorite microcontroller and breaks out everything I use on it. Supports Wi-Fi, MQTT, breaks out SPI and I2C buses. It does a 256 array of analog sensors off it as well, so you can connect as many analog sensors as you want to it. It does a graphic EQ with 7 bands as a decibel meter as IoT data. It's a fun box, but we're here to talk about home automation. Before we get started, you will need some tech skills. Now, Home Assistant is, as of this morning, 0.98 released. I haven't updated yet, but I will be tonight, and I have listened to the podcast with the breaking changes and the feature set. So we'll get to the podcast link later. If you're going to go down this path with Home Assistant, you want to listen to the podcast. Phil is an Aussie. He's based in Melbourne. He's an awesome host, and they do really great content. You can't trust the devices. I started my path with a lot of cheap Chinese devices, Xiaomi particularly. I still run a Xiaomi phone in my pocket, but don't trust them. We'll talk about networks and how you can mitigate some of those risks later. And only authorized devices on mains. You don't want to burn your house down. So there's excuses. I rent, can't install this stuff. Well, so do I. That's why I went Wi-Fi white light globes, why I use buttons that you'll see later on. I didn't change anything permanently. You don't want to rely on cloud services. Jürgen covered that one plenty. You don't. I tried a few. IFT was the worst thing I've ever touched, the slowest thing I've ever touched as well. It's expensive. Well, it doesn't have to be. You can make it yourself if you want. So I started with an aquarium, a smart switch, and wanting to go skiing, which we do a fair bit. But we wanted to turn the fish lamp on and off 10 a.m., 10 p.m., whatever times. And we wanted to automate that. That's where I started. But then Black Friday happened. And I picked up these two things as well. Lovely devices, hate them both with a passion. This thing, Jürgen covered on it a bit. The wrong lights turn on. Voice is the worst way to control your house, in my opinion. You don't want to be sitting on the lounge saying, hey, Google, go to TV time, which is my word for like dimming the lights and we're watching a movie. And then she goes, turning on the bathroom light. No. But so far so good. We're in a single ecosystem. Actually, let's see a backslide. We've got a TP-Link bulb and a TP-Link power plug. I run a TP-Link router at the time. I was okay to trust the brand. So far so good. Single ecosystem, single app, integrated with Google Home. Nice and simple, 2 devices, Google Home, Alexa, everything working. But then the user experience issues, which Jürgen also touched on. Light that can only be done by a voice or an app. Worst light in your world. If you can't turn that light on with a press of a button on the way into a room, it's not a light anymore. We had 2 of them now. Fish tank and the bulb itself, which was in the kitchen at the time. So we needed light switches. Enter Xiaomi. And Xiaomi, I'm a fan of the brand in general. And these Zigbee devices, and we'll touch on Zigbee a little bit in a moment, they're great. Like for $10 or $16, you can get temperature, you can get a button, you can get door read switches, about $10 to $15 US per sensor. You have to run this guy though, which is their Zigbee Hub, which you'll be familiar with from SmartThings or any of those other ecosystems. We'll get to problems with that in a moment. Here's their app. Now, half their features wouldn't work unless you were selecting mainland China as your server. Thanks, Xiaomi. If you select mainland China as your server, this is what you get. And it requires contacts access. Why? Come on, Android people. We needed a local solution, but one does simply not deploy local controllers. So I did have a slide in here about OpenHAB and that other one, DOMAKits, something, yeah. I took it out because Jürgen already covered it, but I found Home Assistant as well, much the same way, searching the internet, and I found this project. I was originally looking for something to just do Python code with the Xiaomi gear. Home Assistant already had, was already using a open source library for Xiaomi Aqara. That library was used by Home Assistant. That led me to Home Assistant. I found a massive community and an awesome app. But now back to the buttons. So HA Home Assistant unlocked the flexibility. It brought all my devices into one ecosystem. I now had everything working well, the Xiaomi stuff, controlling the TP-Link stuff. Single tap, so yeah, keep another word of advice from Jürgen stuff, keep stuff consistent. When I put the light switches in, these guys, so they're about that round, they're pretty small, but I kept it consistent. Single tap was the nearest light, double tap was the next nearest light, hold it down for bright, whatever's on now, or the default light, bright. So that was rolled out across the house, 3 of them, bedroom, so I'm in a 1-bedroom apartment, bedroom, kitchen, and entryway. So on the way in, you could turn on the lounge light and the next area light. Into the kitchen, you could turn on the balcony or the kitchen, and into the bedroom, well, that's still only just the bedroom. Then I found these double guys, pretty much the same thing, but long press just reconnects to Zigbee and talks to me in Mandarin. I also have this guy. I love this guy. He's a cube that sits on my coffee table. If I turn him right, my volume goes up. If I turn him left, volume goes down. If I shake him, my alarm gets armed or disarmed. My favorite device of all. It is not what Jürgen describes as your typical user interface, but it's a user interface that sits on the couch and anyone can learn to use in 5 seconds. So we started getting Xiaomi gear in Home Assistant. Originally, it looked a lot like this in my configuration file. So we didn't touch on this before. Home Assistant currently, all YAML. You're all used to YAML. Everybody loves YAML, right? I'm an Ansible guy, so I love YAML. Some secrets that I'm not exposing today, but Home Assistant does support that in its YAML. You get a secrets file. It's not published in my GitHub, but everything else is. So you can see some, they're obvious. That's a key that you get from the app that you install with the Xiaomi stuff. That's the MAC address and the IP address, and my VLAN, which we'll get to shortly. So Home Assistant presents us our same Xiaomi sensors with an outside temperature graph, kitchen switch, bathroom button, bathroom motion detection, so you can see whenever we were in the bathroom. And some automations around it. So I want to talk a moment about Home Assistant automations. Defined in YAML again. We start with some basic metadata. We're going to call it the kitchen light brightness. We're going to give it an ID. We're only going to trigger it when a button is clicked, and it is the binary sensor wall switch right. So this is my kitchen button, wall switch right, which is that double button I showed before. With a long click press, should turn on that light. Sorry, if that light is on, we'll turn it to bright. So we have a condition. That's the condition that's required for the automation to run, the trigger that actually causes the automation to run, and a bunch of actions for it. So pretty simple scripting, but all in YAML. Now, this is where the security concerns started. That Xiaomi gateway, that mains plug-in box that talks Zigbee to the rest of my network, it talks home way too much. It loves chatting back to China. The Mija, the app that comes with it, which I showed you before, not trustworthy. I told you about the contacts. And integration between the devices relied on external services. So we secured the VLANs. Rolled out 4 VLANs at home. The core network, which is my servers and infrastructure, a user network for media devices, so Chromecasts, Google Homes, anything that plays stuff from the cloud, plus users. We needed to talk to those devices with multicast. People don't use multicast. I hate multicast. My IoT network, light bulbs, other things, all completely isolated from the internet. And my research network, that's the guy with man-in-the-middle proxy and full logging of every traffic. That's where I check new devices out. And Linux and IP tables on my gateway, of course. The house phone, that was the other essential I had to find. So it's an old Android handset of mine. It only is allowed to connect to my IoT VLAN. It never sees my other devices. It has the native apps that Xiaomi require for you to do a firmware update on the light bulbs, for instance. I don't run Xiaomi light bulbs anymore either. They're not authorized for connection to Australian mains. Not a good idea. But this app still is needed for some of the other firmware updates I do for Zigbee things, and the TP-Link stuff. The Casa app from TP-Link still runs on this. So securing the network, I already talked about blocking the IoT devices. Some guys, I had some Broadlink devices at home. they don't get a DNS response from Broadlink.com. They just die. They turn themselves off. So check out response policy zones from DNS. That's the way you would, if you're an ISP and you were trying to block traffic, you'd probably use that. So I give fake responses. I tell them that, or talk to 127.0.0.1 if they want Broadlink. They're happy with that. They get a ping, they get a response, they get a DNS response, they stay online now. People, just stick to standards. Yeah, I also do monitoring of all my IoT traffic. I have radius accounting of all sessions, and I log IP tables excessively to the point of about half a gig a day. I do process that with a script, but most of that data is thrown out after a week. Yeah. So I've talked about compliance issues. Don't be the person who burns your house down. Like mains is dangerous. Don't go playing with it unless you're licensed. Also, don't import, like just because China has the same plug format as us and 240 volts doesn't make it safe. You probably get away with it, but if you burn your house down, it's your fault. So I replaced the gateway. I found this guy. This is a CC2531. It's from Texas Instruments. It's designed as a as a Zigbee sniffer, but it can do all of the Zigbee things with a replacement firmware, which is a bit fiddly. Hence the warning. It does take some fiddling. You do need to either use a TI programmer, or you do need to wire up an Arduino to do the UART stuff to program it. You've got to pull a reset pin at a certain time and send data. It does some weird stuff, but with a bit of fiddling, this can replace that gateway. So now I have a USB device that can talk to all my Zigbee. Now, when we talk about Zigbee, we're talking about, like, that device supports 74 different brands and 350 different Zigbee products that are guaranteed to work, but it should work with almost anything. But Philips Hue, IKEA, Belkin, Osram, one I mentioned a lot, Xiaomi, GE, Dynalock. Have you used any Dynalock stuff? No. And Osram, Chua works as well, I believe, for the Wi-Fi stuff, but we can talk about that in a bit as well, which is like all your cheap Mirabella bulbs and things like that. You don't need to spend more than $15 or $20 on a light bulb. So, back to this guy. So the one thing I needed was a way to get his data into Home Assistant, and Zigbee to MQTT is the solution. Just a quick poll, who has heard of, or knows anything about MQTT? Good? Cool. Right, so MQTT is a lightweight protocol. It's designed for basically pub/sub. It's a topic and message, lightweight, used by all the IoT stuff. Every major cloud provider, AWS IoT Core, is MQTT on its front end at least. And the rest pretty much are as well. They all support MQTT in some form. It's the ISO standard for pub/sub. It's lightweight, it's reliable open source implementation from the Eclipse Foundation. You can trust them. And it's solid. I've never had a Mosquito issue. Never. So Home Assistant in Mosquito or on MQTT supports device discovery, which I have in my live demo later on if we get a chance for that one. I think we can skip most of the MQTT stuff. It's basically string pub/sub topics, JSON payloads if you want, but they're really just strings. Here's an example. So this is actually a live capture from my MQTT at home. You can see I track all my Wi-Fi devices and a bunch of Bluetooth stuff as well through the Google Homes I have in the house. So basically, if you walk past the corner of my block, I know your Bluetooth MAC address and it's logged in my database. I ignore most of them, but we do some home automations around some of them. I run the Home Assistant alarm panel, which is a really interesting one, and we're going to get to some electronics I supplemented that with later. So most of my talks are actually about electronics. We're going to get there soon, though, I promise you. You'll see two similar ones here. This one here is the coming in from a device I call Display Aquarium, which is actually a TFT display with a touchscreen, 4-inch one, mounted in a cardboard box currently because I haven't 3D printed a case for it. And it reports its, in this case here, that would be barometric pressure from a BME sensor. It reports that to Home Assistant, and Home Assistant echoes its state once it updates. So this is Home Assistant state stream here. Anything starting with state stream, and anything not starting with state stream is pretty much a device talking into Home Assistant. That's all mostly from one device. Oh, fast LEDs here as well. So this is a RGB LED controller I built as well, which you'll see some pictures of soon. So that's how I got here. Now we're going to talk about the good stuff. This all reignited a passion I had for electronics. Now, I hadn't, up until 3 or 4 years ago, hadn't picked up a soldering iron since I was 14. Picked it up again, still a little bit to learn. I haven't done any surface mount stuff yet. That's coming. But this is my favorite microcontroller. The Espressif 32 is the one I use most of these days. We've got a whopping 160 megahertz, 80 megahertz if you go back a version. We get Wi-Fi and Bluetooth though, and that's cool because we can do so much with that. They're also less than $10 each. And they have 4 kilobit word memory. They're compatible with the Arduino IDE, the Espressif IDF, that's the IoT development framework, FreeRTOS, which is what Greengrass is based on if you're an Amazon person. FreeRTOS is basically Greengrass's, it's the thing you run on a controller to talk to Greengrass, but we're not here to talk about AWS. It's also programmable in C, C++, Lua, MicroPython, a bunch of others. I tend to stick this end of the stack though, because I figure if I've got 4 kilobit words of memory and 160 megahertz to play with, I don't want to interpret anything. But they do SSL and MQTT. And there's Arduino libraries for all of that stuff too. So for very simple C code and like hit upload over a USB, you've got a sensor. So the first one was my fish tank monitor. It was essentially a submersible thermometer from AliExpress for about $1. My favorite ESP32, it was a 8266 at the time I started, but it's now a 32. The Arduino IDE and one resistor. I have this here. Not that exact one, but one I knocked up this morning in the office in half an hour. Different board, a different form factor of the same board. Temperature sensor, one resistor, and I added an extra LED for the demo for later as well, so I could turn a light on and off for you. But there we go. Minimal soldering required for that as well. Like I did 3 solder to 4 solder joints. But we'll come back to that one for the demo. But iteration's important when you're building things, right? So let's add some ambient temperature. I actually started with this guy. So this is from Adafruit. Adafruit do a lot of amazing products that are just like off the shelf, well documented, have libraries for Arduino IDE. Just plug in some wires and they work. Great way to get started. Bores me these days now. I tend to write on the development tool chain directly with GCC and build and make and upload, and would rather design a board for this to be soldered onto than wire up somebody else's breakout. But this was a great way to get started. Then I decided that that light, that was originally that TP-Link light that we talked about, needed control as well. Thankfully, it was a 12-volt LED on the fish tank, so a MOSFET and a few other components, and we ended up with the light control, temperature sensor with ambient temperature all in one little box. That was my first major project when it came to home automation, do it yourself. So let's get some data. So it publishes to MQTT, and we see some Home Assistant configuration saying that we're going to get MQTT from this topic, it's in this unit, and that's the aquarium temperature. We've got the lounge temperature. This is just some other sensors as well from the same config file. And here is the data they generate. That's just screen capped straight out of my Home Assistant at 5 a.m. yesterday morning. Yeah, I woke up early and finished the slides. Using the data, we talked a little bit about how we use the data before. Here's my automation that warns me via a message that goes to my Hangouts or Facebook Messenger. For my girlfriend, she doesn't like Hangouts as much. If the temperature goes above 29 or below 25 for more than 1 minute, we're going to call a script in my Home Assistant called announce. That's a really simple automation, straight out there in YAML. This is actually, we're going to go more into detail how this works, but this is a custom script I wrote that you can pass in a bunch of parameters, and it just works out how to notify people, whether that's text-to-speech out of speaker in the house, whether that's a Facebook message, a Hangouts message, whether it should play a siren. So that siren still uses, actually it now uses a buzzer in my RFID reader, which we're going to get to shortly. Here's all the parameters for my announce script. All this script does is raise an event in Home Assistant called house speak, letting the house talk, and it sets defaults for all of the options that can run. Now, Home Assistant has a really weird one where if you try to run a massive script inside an automation, it ties up a whole async thread, and you don't want it. You'd rather have your script run an event and then respond to the event, and it actually just works better in the internals of Home Assistant. So yep, the event handler itself was just a set of automations. I showed you the flags before, so let's just go back one. We've got a critical flag here somewhere, critical. We've got a Facebook flag somewhere. Facebook flag, yep. Siren flag and a light flag. Yeah, you can also turn on and off lights or flashlights as well as an alert. So it's just a longer set of automations that you've seen. I'm not going to go through that now. It is in my GitHub if you do want to see it. Use inputs whenever you can for toggling automations. So this is a pro tip. Things like, one of the things I do is my bathroom light auto turns on when I walk into the bathroom every time, unless it's already on. At 3 o'clock in the morning though, I don't want it to come up to 50% or anything that's going to blind me. It comes up to 2 or 3% at 3 o'clock or any time after midnight. Come 9 o'clock the next morning though, we want the bathroom to be bright when you're walking. Well, maybe a little earlier. I don't get to work till 10, so 9 o'clock's my shower. Your light comes up to a certain brightness, different times of the day. I have that as a slider now, which different automations can then change the value of. Rather than going in the automation, checking the time of day, deciding on a value to use and applying that value, I now go, I have an automation that runs at a certain times of the day and sets the value of that field. Then I use those fields in the automation. So it's just about abstracting those automations so you use data from other parts of your system rather than hard coding a 2-minute timeout or a 40% brightness. Here's some of that automation code from that big house speak automation I was talking about. And this one is the sending it out to text to speech. So basically it uses the Google API, sends a string out to it, it gets an MP3 file back, plays it out of speaker. That's what this media player, play media, stuff does, and the data template specifies how to get things. But this will run when house speak is triggered, the event we were talking about before, but only when in its template it has critical set to false, critical or the announcements are on. So if the event is triggered with critical, so an alarm message or a fish tank out of range message, critical can be set on that event. The alert always plays sirens, will wake us up if it needs to, whatever. Without critical set, we don't talk. Like, that's for easily turning on automations. And again, that comes down to leveraging that data, the other settings you can set elsewhere in Home Assistant to control how automations behave. Otherwise, you end up turning on and off automations at different times, and it gets really messy, right, Jürgen? You don't ever turn off automations? No, you just have conditions that stop them or suppress them, yep. So, next we moved into mood lighting. I talked about this a moment ago. LED strips from China, nice and cheap. My favorite microcontroller. They need a 5-volt line for their RGB, but you can control every single pixel on that, and it's just basically a long serial bus of bits, and each LED chip here pulls off the number of bits it needs for itself from that serial bus, sets its light color, and lets the rest travel on. So they're really easy to control. You just need to know the length and the number of LEDs on them. Doesn't need a level shifter to get up to 5 volts because these guys are only 3.3 volts. And the LEDs themselves run at 12. So to solve those problems, I grabbed one of these guys. That's just a buck converter. That's a $2 buck converter from AliExpress. 12 volt in, I break out 5 volts, which I can power the 3.3 volt microcontroller from its USB port with on 5 volts, nice and easily. It's already got a buck from 5 to 3.3. So all that does is lift up the levels, and the latest one of these I built controls 4 different strips with different programs. So basically I used all 4 of the ports on the shifter for that one. Again, controllable over MQTT. Here's a picture of it running on the top of my balcony with a rainbow light or color changer light. Here's the Home Assistant configuration for the light in the interface, and here's the configuration in YAML. So we've got command topic and a payload to turn things on and off. Got a state topic to find out the state, and you saw this JSON in my first MQTT samples back a few slides, where there was the only JSON string in the slide was my light reporting back what mode it's in, what color it's on, how bright it is. And then there's a bunch of other, these are the programmable lists it can respond to. That's all coded on the Arduino code. And that list's just replicated in Home Assistant. Now, if I got smarter, I could deliver that as part of the config payload, which we'll see in the demo. But now it's just a hard-coded list. I don't change the program set of lights very often on the LED strips. Now we move into the area I think is most important with home. And Jürgen touched on this a bit. It's the wife acceptance factor, but it's also how does the house behave when you're home and she's not, or she's home and you're not. There's big differences in our preferences. I like my music loud, she likes pop music. I like bathroom lights in colour generally. I like to shower with coloured lights, and I have a coloured light in my bathroom. She likes white light. So some of the automations we actually can control based on who's home. So I built something, an entry scanner. That's what I'm using currently, that RFID tag. But it was the cheap ones from China originally, an RFID scanner, a little tiny buzzer, which is still the main alarm in the house since I got rid of the Xiaomi gateway, and my favorite microcontroller. Version 2 of that though, it was near the front door because that's where we scanned in and out. Figured just add a $1 read sensor to it for the front door as well. Now I've got both entries covered, my balcony and my door. Balcony is covered by a Xiaomi read switch on Zigbee already. There was no reason to get another one for the front door, but when I had this device already there with power and network and already talking to everything, putting the front door on was a no-brainer. So it does things like the HA alarm, which uses MQTT, so I can arm my home in home mode or away mode. There's a PIN number that's specified in the config. That will be multi-user, I believe, soon. Are you following? You don't use it? People trackers, so you can see some here. These are actually the tokens that are scanned in. I use some Python code alongside with this to do the authentication itself. So that's basically just listens to MQTT, sees a packet from this device, determines whether they're authorized, and then sends another MQTT message if they're not. Now, if you knew the format of those messages, really easy to hack, but it's SSL mutual authentication too. So, different ways of doing presence detection. I use pretty much all of these. Google Maps location data. I have that shared with my house, so my house knows where I am if Google does, which is pretty convenient for an Android user. It's better than trying to run an app to do it dedicated. They drain battery like nothing. OwnTracks is the worst for that, if you've ever tried that one. The unified network detection. Ever since Paulus actually went to Paulus, the founder of the Home Assistant project, he was employed by Ubiquitous for a year. I made the call at that point to support the project more and buy Unify. My house is all Unify now, but I've actually fallen in love with it and rolled it out in my office as well and other places. So my DIY alarm system, but room detection is the big one to solve. I haven't got that solved yet. I've tried some Bluetooth stuff. I still can't tell accurately whether I'm in the bedroom or the lounge room. I'm in a one-bedroom apartment. There's not many options. But this is some of the stuff Home Assistant can do with map data. I actually have automation set up in some of these places. If I enter work, up here on Flinders Street, it knows I'm at work. My house knows I'm at work, so I can start doing other automations. If I happen to walk through Central, or go to my nearest shopping centre near Broadway, or even my local bottle shop, it knows. There's no automation set up for the bottle shop currently yet. Floor plan, this is my other favorite feature, until Jürgen ruined it. Until Jürgen ruined it on me during the week by showing me a 3D version of this, which I now need to go and do. So this is actually a single SVG that's loaded into Home Assistant. Who knows the insides of SVGs? Excellent, excellent. Yep. So you know it's just a DOM, right? Yeah, cool. It's just a DOM. You can apply CSS to elements inside that DOM. So these are all sensibly named elements inside an SVG that I spent a lot of time manually modifying after I exported from Inkscape. But the good thing about SVG is you can open it in Vim and play with it. So if I touched one of these light buttons in my actual app, those lights would turn on. If the alarm got triggered, that would flash red. If my Chromecast is casting, that's green. So that's a really cool visualization of the house. I really want to put this behind a magic mirror, like a mirrored laptop screen, up near a door somewhere or just on a wall, and just have it as an overall house status screen. Really a big fan of that feature. So a couple of things I want to work on next. I'll just let that one sink in for a moment. An OV camera, an ESP32, and OpenCV. Yep, facial recognition on entry to the house for about $10 US.
Will that not solve your room problem as well?
Potentially, that's why I'm looking at it. And I also want to do my own voice stuff. I've been playing with these MEMS microphones. I talked about my EQ project before. These MEMS microphones, they're cheap and they're great. But I want to train a model to do glass detection, glass break detection, fire and evacuation alarm, baby crying, and a wake word, because I reckon if I nail them, the rest is easy. So, who wants to meet my house's primary interface? There's a lot of devices. That's my landing page. You'll see the tabs across the top. We're going to step across them. So from the landing page, we go to media. This is a fun one. I talk about this project a bit on episode 29 of the Home Assistant podcast, where I was a guest. Listen to it if you're keen on how I do house announcements and radio. I use, Echo Radio is actually an Amazon Echo. Bathroom radio is like the cheapest, shittiest waterproof Bluetooth speaker I could find. I can't even remember how little I paid for it. It's got a suction cap on the back and it's waterproof and it sits in the shower. The fun thing about that is when it connects to Bluetooth, it identifies as a keyboard as well because it's got buttons on it. I made a change, I put a pull request in to enhance the keyboard stuff here in Home Assistant to include its Bluetooth ID so that I could tell which Bluetooth keyboard was connected, and if it was a bathroom, turn on the radio automatically. So you just go into the bathroom, hit the power button, and you've got whatever radio station you had last on a Bluetooth speaker. The next is weather generalness. I don't really do much weather automation. I don't have a garden to water. I don't need rainfall to turn on sprinklers. That's what most people use it for, but it's fun to have. Status page. This one I really need to clean up a bit. This is pretty much where I dumped anything that I collected that I didn't have another place for. But you'll see multiple lights around the place. You'll see motion sensors. This shower question mark. I'm going to leave that one with you. Episode 29 of the Home Assistant podcast if you want to find out more about my shower. To break it down though, I try to guess whether somebody's in the shower or not based on other factors. It's hit and miss. When we're talking about how I have a bug from my girlfriend, it's on the bathroom light. Every time she's in the shower, guaranteed 2 minutes, as soon as she turns the water on, it turns off. And she hates it. She has to open the shower door, wave to the motion sensor. If it's too foggy, the motion sensor doesn't work. She has to get out of the shower and press the button. The bug's been open for about 3 weeks. And I'm in trouble. As I said before, I like to ski, so the fourth one, I don't have any IP cameras in my house. I don't have a need for cameras. I'm going to add one for facial rec to play with. I don't know if it's going to be a permanent addition. But I bring in the cameras from my favourite place to go to and escape Sydney from, which is the mountain. So, how quickly can you get up and running? Well, firstly, on a Pi with an SD card, single download, put it in the Pi, boot it up, you're done. Like, that's how easy it is. Like, grab the SD image, just do it. Or, just Docker run it. You all can do that here, I'm sure. Like, this is the audience for it, if anyone. Or, as I like to do, on raw hardware, bare metal. I'm a bare metal kind of guy these days again, since I recovered from DevOps. Sorry? Oh, it is when it's running on bare metal. Well, okay, there's an OS between, but... do you want to go back to bare metal? No. So yeah, Docker, just Docker run it, or virtual env it, and just run it. So going further, if you don't like the look of all that YAML, you can drag and drop things, apparently. I've never tried it, but everybody talks about it in the community. It works. I like this one, actually. This was before I kind of pulled everything out into MQTT. I was running a fair bit of AppDaemon. It is basically a low-level Python API into the rest of Home Assistant without using MQTT as a broker. It's cool, but again, I'd prefer to keep my stuff a little bit more flexible, a little bit more integrating with other stuff, so I went down the full MQTT path. But you can send your data to familiar tools. This is a no-brainer. When you collect the amount of data a house does that I do, SQLite 3 doesn't count. It doesn't cut it anymore at all. Get it into an actual database. I used to dump everything into Influx as well. I wasn't using it. Like, if you're doing cool stuff and you're actually wanting to get time series data on your house, probably do it. But here's a Grafana graph from the office, actually, of my of the prototype board, and that's just the light levels of a morning from the sun rising in RGB. In RGB. TensorFlow, if you really want to do some ML on your house data. You can stream it to Apache Kafka if you want as well. Any Kafka users in the house? Awesome. Yep. And the Home Assistant have just released what they call the Data Science Portal. I haven't delved into it much myself. Uses Jupyter? Cool. All right, there you go. Yeah, so you can start doing some data science on your house data. Have to mention this one though, Nabokasa. It's run by the project. Paulus no longer works for Ubiquitous. He now works for Nabokasa. It is Paulus and the guy who does the Hass.io, the Pi image, who's been building that for a couple of years. They're the only two employees of this company. For $4.99 a month, you can subscribe. I think it's $4.99 still, isn't it? Yep. Yeah. You can subscribe. They once you subscribe, you no longer need to expose 443 to the outside world for Google and Alexa to come in on. This will do WebSockets connections out to their Amazon infrastructure. They promise they won't keep any of your data. I trust them because I run the rest of their platform. They might keep some data. Who cares, really? Like, it's Paulus, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head right now. If they have my data, then they could have it if they really wanted it anyway. They just have to ask. But yeah, it's definitely worthwhile, and it just works. So previously, to get Amazon and Google to work, you'd have to open a dev account with both. I already had, but then you have to deploy some Lambda code or whatever Google does now. This makes it easy. Just drop in the config, and it works. Actually, before I go on, I did say we were at 98 this morning. By version 1, they're hoping to get rid of just about all of that YAML. Pretty much everything now can be configured, or a lot of the major integrations can be configured in the web interface. I'm still split on this one. I like being able to publish my config to GitHub. But I've adopted some of it, and we'll see some of it in the demo later. As I've said a few times, my bathroom automations and shower detection, episode 29 of the Home Assistant podcast from July, I think I was on that, and some resources. Now, if you're keen to do any of this stuff, they've just opened. I'm a big fan, actually, and if you need to learn how to solder either, they run classes at JCAR at Central Park now. They've got a full maker hub with 3D printers, soldering irons, everything you could possibly need to do stuff, even PCB fabrication if you want. I haven't tried that yet there. But here's some links you may want. My config, that's probably a good place to start. It is about a month out of date. I promise you, if you all hassle me enough on Twitter, I will update it this week. I meant to before today, but I'm sorry. Sensor is kind of an abstraction around a bunch of other Arduino libraries that I used early on. I haven't touched it in months, but it is a good starting point for writing Arduino code to integrate with your house. I mentioned Adafruit before. They're an interesting place to get ideas from. They're great at teaching people about electronics. You'll move past them pretty quick though, but a good starting point. And Nick Make is probably one of my favorites. He's from Sydney. The YouTube channel where he does everything from teardowns to roundups of the latest single board computers, microcontrollers, and cool shit to play with. Any questions? Sorry, that was a bit longer than I expected.
Tell us about your bad experiences with AWS IoT. I'll be interested to know what they were.
My experiences with AWS IoT Core?
Your bad experiences with it.
Did I mention bad ones, or?
Yeah, you said you never touched them.
Because I'm building a project around IoT Core on AWS right now for work, so.
Okay, tell us about the positives.
Positive about them? Ooh, I'd rather run Mosquito. But I guess IAM integration and scale. Like I wouldn't run IoT Core on AWS for home. I'm running it on a aged care IoT project that's meant to have at least 2,000 beds across Australia in a short amount of time. We're going into field trials next year for it. It's actually commercializing some research out of RMIT. I'm not sure how much more I can say about it, but it is CRCP funded from the government and an interesting one, but it's IoT for aged care. That's one of my current work projects. Any others?
Are you using voice control or not?
Yes. So I still have...
How does it work if you got the IoT network no internet connection?
Yep, so IoT devices are only allowed to talk to Home Assistant. The only thing Google and Alexa talk to is Home Assistant through Nabokasa. It's basically my IoT firewall. The nice thing about using Nabocasa now as well is there's a point and click turn on and off exposing any individual element within Home Assistant to either Google or Alexa. So you can actually have full control over whether that light is even available or, and I only expose the stuff we need voice control for. I don't expose a lot of my actions, a lot of the shortcut stuff that is like button press specific. I can't think of a good example now. But yeah, you don't have to expose everything through that. Originally, when you were doing do your dev stuff and upload code to either cloud and have that talk back over, and they needed SSL, so you had to let's encrypt your Nginx in front of your Home Assistant. It's simpler this way. It worked for us in this room because we're all familiar with running Nginx and Docker and those things. But in the longevity of the project, I think moving to that web interface is a far better idea for the project. I thought we'd see more of that come out of Paulus working with Ubiquitous. I was actually expecting Ubiquitous to do like an IoT, a home automation hub product out of that relationship, but I don't know what happened there. It lasted the year that they originally agreed to, and then they parted ways amicably. So, as another question.
How do you power your board or sensors? Do you rely on the socket or batteries?
So a couple of different ways. The main microcontrollers I run, so the aquarium and the door strip and the front door, they're all near USB power anyway. The aquarium already had a light and already had a light and a heater. And the front door has kind of my computer area next to it in a weird kind of way. But yeah, they both had convenient USB power. Most of my microcontrollers I just power from a USB brick rather than battery. Most of the Xiaomi sensors, the ZigBee ones, they're all coin cell operated. They report their battery levels back as part of their state information to Home Assistant, so you could do alerting on battery level of devices if you wanted. The ones in the Xiaomi stuff last 2 or 3 years. I don't bother with alerting on them. I'll notice when the sensor stops.
Sorry, how did you configure Kodi, and how does Kodi work with your home automation?
Oh, Kodi and my home automation. Not much, actually. So out of the box, Kodi just works and can be discovered by Home Assistant. So that's the first step. Any of the Home Assistant Play media automations can work with Kodi, just like any other media player component. And what is currently playing will be reported in its state back. So you can then do data analysis on that if you want. The rest of it, like if I'm watching Kodi, I'll pick up the remote and use it just because it's far better than... and Kodi just runs in the bedroom on a Pi, for me, on a Pi 3 or something, or even something earlier. I can't, it needs to be replaced. That's on my list. But yes,
Yeah. Did you have any reliability issues with your ZigBee setup or anything? I mean, you have to flash the firmware, and I had some trouble with that myself.
It's still a work.
How it's working.
It's still a work in progress. Yeah. But the one thing I can promise you, it's not as dodgy as the Xiaomi implementation. The Xiaomi stuff, that gateway would just reboot. Like it flashes its light really brightly about 3 or 4 times when it reboots, and it was in the kitchen. And at night you'd see this like blue just flashing around the walls, and it's like, oh, again. And then for a couple of versions in there, they weren't not all the devices were properly found in Home Assistant. That seems to be fixed now. But since I've gone to the TI sniffer, I've actually found probably less problems. But the first couple of firmware flashes or versions I flashed probably weren't as favorable. I think they've gotten a sweet spot now. There's a point there where they went from announcing, I think, 30 or 40 vendors to 70. And in that period, they seem to stabilize a bit. So maybe revisit it if you haven't for a while. Or are you running that production now? Or?
Production.
Well, it's running your house. That's production in my view. Yeah.
It's pretty stable now, but I did have trouble with the firmware.
Oh yeah. So I ended up flashing that firmware. I didn't. Where is it? Yeah, this guy. Flashing that firmware. I didn't use the Texas Instrument programmer. Mm-hmm. I used ESP32 with UART wiring. Yeah. Maybe that's a difference. I basically built my own programmer because I wasn't spending $80 on the Texas Instruments one. Yeah.
We might go have a break, Jared. Everyone can get a beer. If anyone's got questions for Jared, you can just hit him up while we're having a quick break.
I could really do with a beer, so yes, excellent idea.
Yes, and go a slice of pizza or whatnot. And everyone who's taking photos, I'll get all of those links and I'll get Jared's Twitter so you can abuse him on there and ask him questions. Right? And I'll
There you go.
put it somewhere easily accessible for all of us.
Actually, Discord's probably better than Twitter. If you do want to hassle me, I'm yeah.
Just smash him.